Good evening. Evening, everyone. Thursday, 11th of August. Nearly the weekend. Yes. So, carrying on with Highlands. Not many of them to go now. Highland Scotch whisky. 2 tonight, both of which are roughly in the same place geographically. And closed. Non-existent, no more. Ex-distilleries. So the first one is this particular one. Because I'm literally just going through alphabetical order, which was donated by Michael Bradley. Thank you very, very much for this one. All the way from, I think, New York is where he lives. So this particular dram has really travelled. So Lochside, which was a distillery built in originally 1781, and it wasn't a distillery; it was actually a brewery in a town called Montrose, which is here. And it was a brewery that was owned by, it was James Dukers and Son, who the Dukers company ended up founding the Scottish and Newcastle Brewery Company, which is, or was, they're sort of still going, having been part of a conglomerate, but S&N, Scottish and Newcastle, a really, really big beer company. And they operated I don't even think it was called the Lochside Brewery, it may well have been, but it operated as a brewery until 1957, and then it was bought by a company called McNab Distillers, a shareholder of which was a guy called Joseph Hobbs, who at the time was also the owner of the Ben Nevis distillery. And they converted the brewery into a distillery, and like Ben Nevis at the time, they were making both malt and grain whisky in the same distillery, because it was for a brand called the Sandy McNab Blend, which predominantly was quite big in Europe, sort of southern Europe, so Spain, Italy, Portugal, that sort of region. To the point when in 1973, a Spanish whisky company known as DYC, because it's a Spanish name, I'm not even going to attempt that Spanish pronunciation. I've tried Icelandic and all sorts and just made myself completely embarrassed, so I ain't even going to try. But they were known colloquially as DYC. They actually bought the distillery in '73 to satisfy the demand. Basically, it was selling like hotcakes in Spain and around that region, and they thought, right, we're going to have a bit of that. We're going to maintain the brand, and we're going to get a piece of that action. Thank you very much. DYC became part of Allied de Mec, which eventually became part of Pernod Ricard in 2005. However, by 2005, the Lochside distillery was gone. It was a victim of the, not quite a cull, but there was a lot of distilleries sort of in the mid-80s that shut down. It was basically in the 60s, sort of 50s, 60s, like post-Second World War, 50s, 60s, Scotch whisky just took off. Like everybody was wanting it, and it was massive in America. Loads of production going on, a bit like now there's a lot of more whiskey production going on, and the bubble burst in mid to late 70s. Demand fell, there was too much on the market. The market was flooded, people just got sick of it, and all of a sudden there was no demand, and all these distilleries that had been pumping loads of money into making loads and loads of whiskey, the demand wasn't there. Sales dropped off a cliff, and a lot of distilleries really, really struggled, and quite a few were mothballed. So not necessarily like closed and demolished, but were mothballed. We can't make any more. Let's just shut the doors, leave everything as it is, and let's see what happens. Hence being called mothballed rather than it being fully closed or demolished. So it was mothballed in 1992, and it wasn't until 2004 when they eventually took everything out, basically. And I think in 2000, I think that year that was also gutted by fire as well. And it was almost one of those things where it was like, sod it, we'll knock the thing down. So it is now housing estate. It's been taken out. I thought I was going to say supermarket then, but that's the next one. Oh, spoiler. So it's now houses. It's no more. There's no chance of Lochside ever appearing in that form. So this particular one is a bottling by Gordon MacPhail. We're an independent bottler. We've covered them a couple of times before. Very, very highly regarded independent bottler. This is what the bottle looks like. It's part of their Connoisseur's Choice range. It was distilled in 1991. It was bottled in 2006. So it is a 15-year-old, released at 43%, which is what I think all the Connoisseur's Choice range, they've released at. So it's not 40, they want a little bit of a higher alcohol percentage. Traditionally, Lochside was matured in ex-bourbon casks, so I think with Gordon MacPhail, there wasn't any chill filtering, there wasn't any colouring added. It certainly looks fairly pale for a 15-year-old in bourbon casks, to be perfectly honest. But difficult to get hold of. In terms of a price, if you wanted to buy a bottle, no idea. I did see another Lochside on Master of Malt that was about 50 quid, so anywhere between 50 and 100 I'm going to say for this, but that's not exactly much of a narrow price range. So, it's quite light, and there's a sweetness to it as well. It's not spearmint, and it's not minty, but it's like it's a kid's sweet that's got a hint of mint added to it. So it's almost like a mint fondant. It's quite sugary sweet with a slight mintiness to it. So if you can imagine, even Fry's peppermint cream, something like that, is more minty than this is. But if you think of a Fry's peppermint cream that hasn't had as much mint flavouring added to it, but you've got the sweetness of the fondant inside that chocolate bar, not so much the chocolate on the outside, but the fondant inside of a Fry's chocolate cream. In fact, they do a plain version, don't they? They do a non-minty version, the blue one that's just fondant, and then the green one is the mint. So if you kind of took the non-minty one but just added the merest hint of mint flavouring to it, it's kind of that. It's quite pleasant actually, but it's quite light. It smells like it's going to taste quite sweet. It's a very pleasant nose, but it's very delicate, quite spring-like. That's nice. That's nice. That mintiness comes through a little bit more on the palate. There's a hint of sweet peat to it as well, which works really, really nicely. It's very, very. It's a delicate but rich mouthfeel as well. Very filling in the mouth. Silky, silky mouthfeel. Really, really nice. Nice bite to it at the end of it. The finish is pretty decent as well. It's not full on and it's not complex, but it's just there. It's just lingering enough. There's not bags of flavour to it. It's a very delicate whiskey. And it's quite a narrow field of flavours, but what's there is really well balanced, very, very pleasant, very easy drinking. This is almost like a digestive whiskey, so before a meal rather than afterwards. And like I say, it's quite a spring-like whiskey. It's not quite as fragrant as the one that I've, since doing the challenge and since I had it, the one I always go back to as a perfect spring whiskey was something like the Diedenacker number 1, or the Belgian Ale. This has slightly more depth to it and slightly more richness, but it would sit alongside those on a spring day, a nice summery fresh spring day. That's a really pleasant whiskey. It's not got, like I say, it's not got bags of flavour, it's not massively complex, it's not deep and meaningful and you'll spend hours over it, but as a really, really good quality, easy drinking whiskey that has enough complexity to make it really interesting, really enjoyable, would sort of take your attention away from what you were doing. If you were given a glass of that and you're like, oh, thanks very much, I'm just doing this, and this, you'd take a sip of it and it would actually stop you in your tracks and go, oh, blimey, actually that's really good. That is really good. Very, very pleasant whiskey indeed. And if they were like that, it's a bloody shame it's gone. Because if I could find that, I would pick up a bottle of that. That's really, really nice. Quite distinctive as well. Light, fruity, and it is quite fruity. It's kind of but it's soft fruits. It's like mango and passion fruit and slightly tropical even. That's really nice. Really impressed with that. Michael, thank you very much for that. That's an absolute stonker. Love it. Whether you can find it, different matter entirely. But that's great stuff. Really, really good. Right, quick rinse out, and I shall crack on with the next non-existent, closed distillery. You know what I mean. Right, see you in the next one. Cheers.